Let's get to the Phillies mailbag. Frank Klose is down in Clearwater with the Threshers right now. Probably a lot more fun, Frank, than watching the big league club right now. And give us a little quick overview of Clearwater, some of the guys that you're intrigued to watch down there, and some of the guys who could be making their way up the organizational ladder.
Yeah, there certainly are a lot of guys that you want to take a look at pretty much at every minor league level. In fact, I seem to have gotten more mileage this year out of going to the minor league games and checking up on these players. But the nice thing about Clearwater is they actually have a pretty decent little rotation going. You might be familiar with Alberto Torrado, he was acquired in that Ben Revere trade a couple of years ago. Very promising, lively arm. Tonight the Threshers are going to throw Jose Taveras, who is also having a nice season, and Franklin Kilome is also a solid pitching prospect. He pitched last night and got the win. And, Cornelius Randolph, the 2015 first-round pick, he's down here. So we could go on and on. There's a lot of guys to check out pretty much at every level. But it's nice to know that even as much as we talk about those upper-level prospects, and some of whom may work out, some of them may not, down even at the lower levels, there's a lot more to look at. So it's actually a very, very comforting thought for Phillies fans to know that at every level they've got some great prospects.
Yeah, let's dive into the mailbag, and we'll go to a question that kind of deals with the minor leagues a little bit more. The past few years, this is from Zach, the Phillies have selected outfielders with first-round picks. Why not pitchers? He says, I feel like they need more pitching. Now, I do know they took Nola a couple of years ago in the first round, so they did get a pitcher. But, yes, they have taken a couple of bats recently.
Yeah, so Aaron Nola was the last first overall pick that the Phillies made. That was in 2014. And I guess, last year, Mickey Moniak, they had the opportunity to pick anybody that they wanted, and they settled on high school outfielder Mickey Moniak. I do want to point out that, a lot of our discussion leading up to that draft revolved around that big lefty arm from Florida, A.J. Puck, and certainly Barnegat's Jason Groom got our attention along the way. So they really did their due diligence last year to try to maximize the value on that first-round pick. And I think last year it was just a matter of Mickey Moniak was the best player in the end. And when you look at when Puck got selected and Groom got selected, Puck went 6th overall to Oakland, and Groom didn't go until pick number 12, and it was the Boston Red Sox who picked him up. So you kind of wonder if the Phillies struck on one of those types of guys earlier that they would be sort of perhaps making a mistake, you might say, if they took a talent that would have driven that far down at the first pick. So I think they're very happy with their pick of Moniak for that draft. And now this draft, certainly there were a few good pitchers along the way. Brendan McKay got the most attention along the way. Hunter Green, who ended up going 2nd overall, was there. We saw the Braves draft Wright, who is a nice arm as well, but those players weren't available when the Phillies picked, So in some drafts, when you're picking 1st overall, you can take the best player. And other drafts, you sort of get the best when it's your time to pick. So I would like to point out, however, that the Phillies' 2nd-round pick, Spencer Howard, is what scouting director Johnny Almaraz called the best right-handed arm in the draft. So I think they're very, very high on that pick. I think they were very excited that they were able to get him in the 2nd round. So I really don't think they're trying to avoid pitchers. I think they're just trying to get the best possible pick. And I do want to point out that in the entire 2017 draft, the Phillies actually drafted 20 different pitchers. So at all levels in the draft, there was a lot of pitching selected by the Phillies. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to flip some of these other prospects for starting pitchers or won't sign pitchers in free agency when the time's right. So I wouldn't worry so much about the positions, because also if you consider how long it usually takes these players to get to the major leagues, Aaron Nola was the exception that he came up quickly, but 2013 draft was J.P. Crawford, and he's still not up yet. So there's still plenty of time to put together a good team.
Frank, speaking of pitching, Van says, did you know the Phillies have lost 16 one-run games with 10 blown saves? Who is the closer of the future? Is he in the organization? That's in the mailbag from Van.
Yeah, I think the Phillies don't have their closer of the future yet. Now, I just mentioned Alberto Torrado, who's starting down here in Clearwater. They kind of project him to perhaps close someday. That remains to be seen. He's got a lively arm, but I think we're seeing right now with Hector Neris that, it used to be that the guy that throws the hardest, you make him the closer, and that's your solution. We're learning with Hector Neris, it's not that simple. Now Neris was the one that everybody wanted to close, and I think right now what we see with Neris is he does have that high 90s fastball, mid to high 90s fastball, but major leaguers today can hit a mid 90s fastball, no problem. And I think it really kind of reached its worst when we saw Neris give up. Remember in Los Angeles that back-to-back home run inning and blew that save. Now Neris basically has got his splitter and his fastball. His splitter isn't really working this year. That's something that when you look at relief pitchers, some years you see that their secondary pitches kind of come in and out, and really in this case, Neris, this is what got people out so well last season. Now, he was one of the more dominant eighth-inning arms last season, but his splitter was working. And we see that with relievers all the time, some years on, some years off. I think what you want to do is you get that guy who's consistent from year to year, and you pay a lot of money for him. Phillies last did it for Jonathan Papelbon, and for all the concerns people have with Papelbon, either off the field or things he says, he was as consistent as you get for that 4-year span for the Phillies closing game. So I think when the time comes, they're going to open up the checkbook. After 2018, the likes of Craig Kimbrell are available as free agents. Maybe they go that route, or maybe they make a trade. A lot of it, as I mentioned, earlier, there's a lot of prospects at every level. So I think they're going to strike for a reliable arm when they can. I don't think we're going to necessarily know right now if somebody in the system is going to take that role on.
Talk with Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com, Phillies Insider. The mailbag is open. You can always hit Frank up on Twitter, at Frank Klose with a K. And everybody wants to know, the new thing in sports is younger, always younger. Who's the next young guy? And Eric wants to know, when are we going to see Rhys Hoskins? He's hitting, he's hitting his way, but he can't get up here.
Yeah, unfortunately for him, and unfortunately for the Phillies in a way, the only prospect that really seems like he's worthy of a promotion is Rhys Hoskins right now. And unfortunately, he plays the position that Tommy Joseph plays. Now, you remember at the end of April when he's batting 172, I basically said, well, if you get to June 1st and he's still hitting 172, well, then maybe you see some change. But guess what? Tommy Joseph hit 300 in the month of May. And so far in June, he's hitting 299. So he's been very consistent over these 7 weeks once he sort of bottomed out at the end of April. So he's kind of – and just to take a step back, before the season began, we basically said that Tommy Joseph in 2017, the question is going to be, are you a major league player? Well, I think now that you have this bigger sample size, he's kind of expressing that he is indeed a major league player. And so then what do you do when you have a prospect behind him? Well, the prospect just needs to wait a little bit. So, Eric wanted me to give an over-under date for him. Now, I picked August 1st I think I said August 31st, because I think he's not going to get up here until September unless the Phillies end up making a trade involving Tommy Joseph. Now, there could be a team at the deadline that really needs a boost at first base, and maybe the Phillies capitalize on that. I mean, they've got Tommy Joseph under 4 more years of control after this one, which is pretty significant if you're a team who's going to make a big trade. And, you don't like to trade players, prospects in quantity and quality unless you're going to get something out of it long term. So Joseph could be an attractive trade piece if the Phillies feel comfortable doing that down the line. But really, you need the right match. Looking around the contenders right now, you don't really know. Nothing really jumps out as a team that he necessarily fits just yet, but that could very well change as time goes on.
All right, Frank Klose has the mailbag every Tuesday at this time on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN, and you can hit him up on Twitter at Frank Klose with a K. I implore you to go to the Clearwater Bait House while you're down there.
Yes, you've mentioned that many times. I would love some fresh seafood.
Yes, that's the place to be. By the way, the Phillies just made some news, and we're going to bring Frank Klose back in. Frank's down in Clearwater covering the Threshers. checking out the Phillies of the future. But I know, Frank, you have been talking on our show a bunch of times about Hobie Milner. I don't know so much about Cam Perkins, but the Phillies today made a couple of interesting moves. I don't want to say dramatic or drastic, but, they shook some things up finally. Jeanmar Gomes and Michael Saunders designated for assignment. Lefty Hobie Milner and outfielder Cam Perkins have taken their place, Frank. So if you can tell us a little bit about Hobie Milner and Cam Perkins, and are you surprised at all that Matt Klentak got rid of Gomes and Saunders?
Well, I've been pushing for Hobie Milner for a while, and frequently that name comes up. He only got scored upon. I think it was only one outing last I checked up with him, but he's kind of a side-arming lefty. He's really hard to follow, for batters to try to get a read on his pitches as they come in. And he's lefty. So right now the Phillies desperately need a second lefty in the bullpen. Right now all they have is Adam Morgan until they added Hobie Milner. So you can't get a bullpen by on Adam Morgan being your only lefty. So that's the first thing there. I think he'll be a big addition to the Phillies, and I think he was most deserving about it. Now, I think this is pretty dramatic in a certain way because the Phillies basically just said, you know what, Michael Saunders, you haven't given us anything all year. We're going to eat your $10 million goodbye, that's pretty bold if you ask me, because he's got a $9 million contract. It's $1 million to buy out next year. And really, Cam Perkins, I think he really, I think people are going to say, well, why not Dylan Cousins? Why not Nick Williams? I think the reason for that is we went into 2017 looking at that Iron Pigs outfield, and you had who? You had Roman Quinn, Nick Williams, Dylan Cousins. Now, Cam Perkins was in Philly spring training, and he did not make the club, but he proceeded to hit near 300. He's got an OPS of like 863. He's showing some power, a good amount of doubles and a few triples and a handful of home runs. He basically did not have a position when the season began for the Iron Pigs, and yet he just put his foot on the accelerator and just went forward. So I think very, very good for Cam Perkins that he's going to finally get a chance. Very, very good for Cam Perkins that he didn't sort of give up knowing he didn't really have a spot at AAA. He kind of went in there as the kind of the DH playing some first base, whatever role he could fill, and he sort of clawed his way back into the Phillies thinking about him. So good for him.
Yeah, Perkins, 298, 6 homers, 21 ribbies in 63 games. Milner, 27 strikeouts in 27 2/3 innings at AAA. So that's the stats for the two guys.
Meanwhile, Saunders was an all-star last season, Frank. What happened to that guy?
I wish I could tell you. He just seemed to have fallen off the face of the earth. Now, when the Phillies signed him,
by the way, he was awful. He was awful in the second half of last year. So he made the All-Star game, and then he hit 205 in the second half of last year. So he fell off somewhere last year.
Right. And we knew the Phillies needed a left-handed bat with a little bit of pop. I thought that even with his regression last year, he could still hit you 20. He didn't. Other names I was talking about, Brandon Moss. Brandon Moss isn't doing anything either. Although the one name that would have been the absolute cheapest is absolutely raking, and that's Logan Morrison for the Rays. But really, the Phillies probably got the best left-handed bat that they possibly could have when that was a clear weakness on this team. And I can't blame them for trying, but I give them credit for basically saying that it didn't work and moving on.
Frank Klose is with us. The Phillies just made a pair of moves. Michael Saunders gone. Jeanmar Gomes gone. Now, this was a guy that realistically was a great story last year, Frank. I mean, he was really the story of the first half of the season. Without him, who knows where this team would have been. I mean, he had a save streak of I don't know how many straight games without blowing a save. What happened to this guy?
It's funny. It's kind of what I was just saying a little while ago. Sometimes relievers go from season to season, and they just don't have command of certain pitches. By
the way, his numbers this year, Frank, his numbers this year are hideous. He's given up 31 hits in 22 innings. His ERA is 7.25, and his WHIP is 170. I mean, he puts almost 2 runners on base every single inning. Just awful.
Yeah, he just doesn't have it this year. I think when you look at Gomes, he he did so well last year because he had great command of all his pitches. This year, he doesn't know where they're going when he throws them, and unfortunately, he's getting hit around a lot. Now, the way relievers are, when the Phillies got Gomes, they got him after the Pirates had designated him for assignment, and the Phillies got him on a minor league deal. Now, he could be the type of guy that a year or two from now he winds up back in the major leagues for somebody as he sort of figures it out again. But obviously, he's just killing the Phillies. I mean, when they get through their big three relievers, Nishak, Benoit, and Neris, when you need to go to another arm, unfortunately, they've used all their bullets, and they usually have to go to Gomes, which leads to a lot of these extra inning losses. So they had to do something. They really should have had a second lefty all along. And, I personally would have cut Gomes after that St. Louis game. When he came out for that second inning and just totally got lit up in that second inning after getting through one inning, that would have been the end for me. And should be very grateful for all he did last year. And one name I mentioned earlier too, which is very similar. That I mentioned it in the mailbag. I didn't talk about him on year, but Sam Dyson for the Rangers. He's somebody who saved 38 games for them last year, and he got designated for assignment a couple weeks ago. So it happens sometimes with relievers.
Cam Perkins, I want to get your opinion on this. He's a 26-year-old guy. He's versatile. He can play around. But what does it say that they decided to bring a guy like him up rather than a Nick Williams, or I know Quinn's hurt, but or Cousins or somebody like that? Well, when they bring up Perkins, is there a message there?
Well, I think the only real message is that this guy really earned it. When you consider that spring training, he didn't make the club. I tended to think that this was Perkins' last chance. If he made the club out of spring training, then this would have been his chance. And he's a righty bat too. He's not a lefty like Williams or Cousins, but I think that the Phillies just looked at him and decided they owed him an opportunity to see what he can do in the major leagues. I think last week we talked about how at least for me personally, I wanted to see a little bit more consistency over a longer period from Williams or Cousins. But I will say, I think if Roman Quinn were not injured, he probably would have been the one who came up.
Frank, Hellickson's pitching tonight, and he's been struggling. Do you think that Matt Klentak will be able to move him this season?
That's a tough one. I think if he fires off 3 or 4 more good starts, they have a shot. There's too many teams that need pitching, and I think if he can show some consistency, then they're going to go for trying to move him. But I think if they don't, they're just going to make him pitch 6 innings no matter what, every time he goes out, no matter how many runs he gives up.
I did see a report, too, by the way, that it was the best minor league outing, 8 1/3 innings last night from
Mark Appel.
Yes. Is that a name that maybe could be on the Phillies' radar going forward, or is that too small a sample size?
Well,
he's been pitching well more recently, right, Frank?
Right. And he's kind of in a situation like Perkins. He's on his last few chances to sort of show he belongs. Now, hopefully the Phillies get Vince Velasquez back soon, and they don't need to dip into their minor leagues anymore. But Mark Appel really needs this. He really needs to show that the Phillies shouldn't give up on him yet, because you started to wonder, maybe a few weeks ago if when they needed a 40-man roster spot, they might go for Appels. But it's very interestingly, if you remember when the Vince Velasquez trade kind of was held up, and the Ken Giles trade. Derek Fisher, an outfielder, was in the deal originally, and the Phillies actually switched it out for Appel after some Velasquez injury concerns. And Derek Fisher is now in the major leagues and had his first major league home run. So you really hope that Mark Appel works out for you, especially when you didn't take on Derek Fisher, who is now in the Astros outfield.
All right, Frank, I know you're on a little bit of a vacation. He just closed on a nice townhouse down there in Clearwater.
All right,
and he's down there checking out the Threshers. And, again, I can't stress enough, go to the Clearwater Bait House.
You got it.
Thanks for coming back, pal.
Thanks, guys.